For decades, people have wondered why Priscilla Presley chose to live her life without ever walking down the aisle again. She was young, admired, and had the world at her feet. Yet, after her divorce from Elvis Presley, she never remarried. At 80 years old, she has finally spoken openly about her reasons, and the truth is more heartbreaking than anyone expected. Her story is one of love, loss, and the heavy shadow of a man who could never truly be replaced. The beginning of an unusual love. The story began in 1959 in West Germany when Elvis Presley was serving in the U.S. Army. At 24, he was already one of the most famous men on earth, a global icon whose records had sold millions and whose name stirred hysteria wherever it was mentioned. Priscilla Presley was only 14, the daughter of a U.S. Air Force officer recently transferred overseas. She was still in high school, adjusting to life in a foreign country, when fate placed her in the orbit of the most famous entertainer in the world. Their paths first crossed at a casual gathering arranged by one of Elvis's friends. Priscilla, dressed modestly in a navy and white sailor dress, entered the room nervous yet curious. She was just a teenager, shy and soft-spoken, but her presence caught Elvis's attention immediately. He noticed her delicate features, her quiet demeanor, and later admitted she reminded him of his mother, Gladys, who had died only a year earlier. Elvis was vulnerable and grieving, and something about Priscilla's innocence filled a void he could not explain. The connection was unusual, even controversial, and the 10-year age gap could not be ignored. Priscilla's parents were wary, alarmed by the thought of their teenage daughter spending time with a man so much older and so globally known. But Elvis, skilled in charm and persuasion, managed to win their cautious approval. He visited their home in uniform, spoke respectfully to her father, Captain Paul Beaulieu, and promised he would protect and care for Priscilla. "She's a lot more mature than her age," Elvis insisted, easing their fears while concealing his own intentions. Privately, he confided to a friend that Priscilla was young enough that I can train her any way I want. Their relationship unfolded slowly, under careful control. Elvis, conscious of appearances, avoided public outings with her, but invited her into his inner circle. He limited their intimacy, insisting she remain pure until marriage. At the same time, he began shaping her identity. He influenced the clothes she wore, the makeup she used, and even the way she styled her hair. To Elvis, Priscilla was not just a companion, she was someone he could mold into his vision of the perfect partner. By 1963, after years of late-night phone calls, letters, and visits, Priscilla convinced her parents to let her move to Memphis. The condition was that she would finish school, and she initially stayed with Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, in the house behind Graceland. But her life was already intertwined with Elvis's world. From that moment, she was no longer simply a young girl caught in a whirlwind romance. She was a living part of Elvis's carefully constructed universe, the woman he had shaped to stand by his side. Marriage and the illusion of happiness. After nearly 8 years of waiting, Elvis Presley and Priscilla Presley finally married in Las Vegas on May 1st, 1967. She was just shy of her 22nd birthday, and he was 32. The ceremony lasted only 8 minutes, rushed and orchestrated by Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's powerful manager. Parker had pushed for the marriage, concerned about public perception of the unusual arrangement, a teenage girl living under Elvis's roof at Graceland without being his wife. For the cameras, it was a fairy tale wedding. But behind the smiles, quiet doubts were already beginning to surface. In the early days, married life carried moments of joy. They laughed together, traveled, and for a time, Priscilla believed her years of sacrifice had led to the happiness she had dreamed of. Yet the cracks appeared quickly. 9 months into their marriage, Priscilla gave birth to their only child, Lisa Marie Presley, on February 1st, 1968. What should have been a time of shared joy was instead marked by uncertainty. Elvis worried that fatherhood might damage his carefully cultivated image as a heartthrob. During Priscilla's pregnancy, he briefly suggested a trial separation, leaving her confused and heartbroken. Even after Lisa Marie's birth, intimacy between the couple began to fade. Elvis reportedly struggled to reconcile the image of Priscilla as the young girl he had molded with her new role as a mother. In her memoir, Elvis and Me, Priscilla later admitted that he told her he had never been able to make love to a woman who had a child. For a young wife who had given up her own adolescence for him, this rejection was devastating. She began to doubt her worth and her identity as a woman, while Elvis immersed himself more deeply in his work, his fans, and the growing distractions of fame. Priscilla had entered marriage believing she was chosen to be the one woman Elvis would commit to, but in reality, the distance between them was already spreading, fueled by insecurities, temptations, and the immense pressures of his career. Cracks behind the curtain, infidelity, isolation, and the need to escape. By the end of the 1960s, the magic of Elvis and Priscilla's marriage had begun to unravel. While the public saw a glamorous couple living at Graceland, behind closed doors, Priscilla felt invisible. Elvis was touring, performing in Las Vegas, and spending more and more nights surrounded by admirers. The letters that arrived at their Palm Springs home from women confirmed what Priscilla already feared. His attention was divided, and she was not the only one in his world. Priscilla later admitted she tried to turn her back on his infidelity. He wasn't faithful, not that he had someone special, but when you're in the entertainment business, there is always that. I just didn't want to share him, she explained. But sharing him was exactly what her life had become. Elvis, as much as he wanted a family, was not built for monogamy. The pressure of being Elvis Presley, the man millions adored, made fidelity almost impossible. While Elvis drifted further away, Priscilla found herself struggling to define her own identity. She had been molded since she was a teenager to fit his world, to live his life, to make his happiness the priority. Her problems, her desires, and her needs were always secondary. But by the early 1970s, the weight of that sacrifice was crushing her. In 1968, she began private karate lessons, looking for a sense of independence. Those lessons brought her close to instructor Mike Stone. What began as a way to fill the emptiness eventually grew into a quiet affair. For the first time in years, Priscilla felt seen, valued, and alive. When she confessed to Elvis in 1972 that she wanted to leave, his reaction was filled with anger, confusion, and heartbreak. He had been unfaithful too, but he never imagined Priscilla would walk away. To him, she still belonged to him. Yet Priscilla had made up her mind. She needed to find out who she was beyond being Mrs. Elvis Presley. In July 1972, she left Graceland. Their divorce was finalized in October 1973, after 6 years of marriage and over a decade together. For Priscilla, leaving Elvis was not the end of love. It was the beginning of survival. After Elvis, building a life of her own. When the divorce was finalized in 1973, Priscilla Presley was only 28 years old. For more than a decade, she had lived entirely in Elvis's shadow, shaping her identity around his moods, desires, and fame. Suddenly, she was free, but that freedom came with fear and uncertainty. She had custody of their daughter, Lisa Marie, and the responsibility of creating a stable life outside Graceland. At first, she focused on rediscovering herself. She had given up her teenage years and early adulthood to Elvis, and now she wanted to know what it meant to be Priscilla. She ventured into business, opening a boutique in Los Angeles, and soon after explored acting, eventually finding success with roles on Dallas and in the Naked Gun films. These steps were not just career moves, they were survival, proof that she could exist beyond the Presley name. Despite the divorce, Elvis and Priscilla remained close. "We never lost our friendship," she later said. They still spoke often, sharing moments as co-parents and old companions. Yet she could see his decline. Colonel Tom Parker continued pushing him into relentless tours. Elvis relied increasingly on prescription drugs to sleep, to wake, and to numb the pressure of his existence. His health deteriorated rapidly, and the spark that once defined him dimmed. In August 1977, tragedy struck. Elvis Presley died suddenly at Graceland of a heart attack at only 42 years old. Priscilla was stunned. "It was just too hard to believe," she recalled. At the funeral, as she looked out from the limousine, she saw streets lined with fans weeping, collapsing, and mourning. It was then she fully realized the scale of Elvis's impact and the burden he had carried. For Priscilla, the grief was personal and profound, not just for the man she once loved, but for the father of her child, and for the unfinished story they would never complete. The loss of Elvis left a void that nothing could fill. And perhaps it was in that moment that Priscilla understood she would never marry again. Protecting the legacy, living without a husband. After Elvis's death in August 1977, Priscilla's life changed forever. She was only 32, with a 9-year-old daughter, and suddenly faced with the responsibility of protecting the Presley name. Graceland, Elvis's beloved home, was in financial trouble. Maintaining the estate cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and many advised her to sell it. But Priscilla refused. In 1982, she made the bold decision to open Graceland to the public. Critics doubted her, but the gamble paid off. Within months, it became one of the most visited homes in America. She had not only preserved Elvis's legacy, but secured a financial future for Lisa Marie. In the years that followed, Priscilla built her own identity. She acted in films like the Naked Gun series, appeared on Dallas, and became known as more than just Elvis's ex-wife. Yet, when it came to her personal life, she kept her choices deliberate. She entered a long-term relationship with businessman Marco Garibaldi, with whom she had a son, Navarone, in 1987. But even then, she chose not to marry. "To be honest with you, I never wanted to marry after him. I never had any desire," she explained years later. "No one could ever match him." Priscilla later admitted that part of her decision came from Elvis himself. While he was alive, she felt he couldn't have accepted her remarrying. "I don't believe he could have handled that," she said. But beyond loyalty, there was also a quiet truth. She had already lived through what she believed was the greatest love of her life. To stand beside another man as a wife would have felt like a betrayal, both to Elvis and to the story they had shared. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Priscilla became not just the keeper of Elvis's estate, but also the keeper of his memory. She wrote her best-selling memoir, Elvis and Me, in 1985, offering a raw and intimate look at their relationship. For millions of fans, the book was the closest they could come to understanding the man behind the legend. For Priscilla, it was both catharsis and a way to ensure that Elvis's truth, along with her own, would not be forgotten. Love, Loss, and the Truth, revealed at 80. As the years went by, Priscilla Presley carried both the weight of memory and the strength of survival. She never remarried, and every relationship she had after Elvis was kept private, free from public vows or expectations. In interviews, she often returned to the same point. Elvis had been the love of her life, and no one could replace him. In 2018, she openly admitted that Elvis had not been faithful during their marriage. Yet she never spoke with bitterness. Instead, she described the complexity of loving a man who belonged not just to her, but to the world. "He wasn't faithful, not that he had someone special. But when you're in the entertainment business, there is always that," she said. "I just didn't want to share him." As much as he dreamed of a family, she believed Elvis was never truly made for marriage. Even after decades, she continued to share stories of their private life. Nights spent watching Johnny Carson's monologues before heading to the movies, or Elvis renting out an entire theater so they could watch films undisturbed with his friends. These intimate details painted a picture of a man both larger than life and deeply human. The loss of Lisa Marie Presley in January 2023 brought another wave of grief. Lisa, the only daughter Priscilla had with Elvis, died at 54 from complications after surgery. Just days before, mother and daughter had attended the Golden Globes together, celebrating Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. For Priscilla, it was another reminder of how fragile and fleeting life could be. In September 2023, Priscilla attended the Venice Film Festival premiere of Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. Sitting beside actress Kylie Spaney, who portrayed her younger self, she relived the memories on screen. When the film ended, she turned to Spaney and told her, "That was a great performance." It was more than praise. It was a passing of the torch, an acknowledgement that her story, with all its pain and beauty, would continue to live on. Now, at 80, Priscilla has finally spoken plainly. She never remarried because her heart had already been spoken for. No one could match Elvis. No one could take his place. And for her, to marry again would have been to let go of something she never wanted to lose. Priscilla Presley's story is not just about love. It's about devotion, loss, and living with the memory of someone who could never truly be replaced. What do you think? Was her decision to never marry again a sacrifice, or was it her way of honoring the love she once had? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.